It's different every time. It's always going to be like that, unless I decide otherwise. Anyway, that's the theme for, sort of a theme for All About Aesthetics, and this is episode 14. Hi, Yvette. Good to see you. I don't know who else is here. If anybody's in the chat, it's really we've done 14 episodes. That's a lot of episodes. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I sort of have to think about it. Now, I just played this little snippet of music, and if you're tuning into my Peter, if you're tuning into my concert, that's a trio conception, and this is solo piano what I just did, and it's kind of I'm not going to try something now. I'm going to talk about many things in this episode. I mean, there's going to be a structure to it. Don't worry, but I am going to be a little more free floating. I have some things queued up, some videos. But I'm working on a piece of music now, and I'm going to play a little bit of what I have, and this is for October. And I'm just interested in. No, that's not it. Hold on. Let me try to get more. So. That's all I have. That's a new piece, and composing. So where were we? We're talking about all the episodes we've been doing. I'm gonna take a drink of coffee, and I'm gonna talk about things. Well, I'm just trying to, it's really for October because I'm going to be going to Interlochen. At my alma mater, Interlochen Arts Academy, promoting world friendship through the arts was their banner. I'm a alumni of there in Michigan, and I had to make a choice. I had to say to this, well, Mitch, do you want to just go in and do an improvised? I'm going to be performing. Do you want to do an improvised selection piano, which I can do? I enjoy very much. I mean, just sitting down and seeing what happens, and of course, there's many. As they say these days, thousands of hours or many decades practice going into having something worked up so that you can deliver that on the spot? Or do you want to have it be a little more composed? And I chose the latter, have something be a little more composed. I don't know, just to have it be composed. I don't know, it's not really right or wrong. It's just kind of, but I may, when I get there in Michigan, I may, throw it all out and do some entirely unrelated thing. You never know what you're gonna do. And that's one of the themes of our show, of course, as well as this episode. So what I'm wearing. So see this? I don't know if you can see it that well. Let's see here. This could probably, yeah. See those stripes in there? There's a little bit of brown and there's like a burgundy. So this is actually a plaid sport coat. The technical term is a window pane because it's like windows of a pane, but it's kind of invisible. Like it could work as a solid, and it's something it's one of the very last things I had made. So that means it would have been 2016, 2017, fairly new. And of course, the weather's a consideration. Now, the weather's very warm and even hot here, which I'm not used to in September. So typically when I was living in Boston right now would not be getting towards 80 or even 75. It would be 55, maybe, or 65. And so I had to recalibrate what I was going to wear. And that's why I'm wearing really light trousers. I mean, light, not light in color, but, and cloth and all these are all considerations of what to wear. And so this is kind of interesting. And also this shirt, you can see here. When I was having shirts made by Reza, the Iranian family that the brothers and Reza in New York City, they were making actual shirts, beautiful handmade shirts. I had some of them made so that they were. You could choose whether you wanted to wear them with a button or with a jewelry or French cuff. And I chose here today to wear them with cufflinks. And they're mismatched. Each of these is missing its other pair. This is from Paul Smith, and again, there's the theme there, of course, of the centerfold, a kind of a Vargas woman reading a red book. Maybe that's a joke on Godard, little red book or something. I don't know. And so they sort of match, but they don't. They're two different women. And this is one. But I'm going to throw these away. I'm going to put them here, and I'm going to button these. See, because you can button them. And I just wanted to show. And the reason why you do things like that is for versatility in one's wardrobe. Just like today, I'm wearing, as you can see here, very, very light. Normally, I'd be wearing what's called a cavalry twill, or covert. These are terms from England. Covert or cavalry twill, which is a heavier cloth to accommodate, like 50 degrees or something. And it has kind of a ridge, and this is much more like what you wear in the summer, because for all intents and purposes, it's the same as summer. We're still in summer, at least until nighttime. And so I don't mean to be boring. I'm just saying that these are the kinds of things that at one time in my life were a larger part of my life than they are now. And so I have what they call a capsule wardrobe. It's not very large. I had to get rid of many things. Capsule wardrobe, where things go with other things at any event. So I thought it'd be fun. I'm going to stay on clothes before we get to books a little bit. So I know I've talked about this before, but the question of why I dress like I do, well, there's really two reasons. Three, actually, I guess there's 3 or 4 reasons now I think about it. So originally, in the late 70s and early 80s, there was a lot of television syndication. That's right, the episode called The Hop, Reza Nasserbach and his sons. Great firm, New York. Anyhow, I just saw the link there, shirt makers. Any event, in the late 70s, there's a lot of syndication of old movies, particularly the MGM musicals, RKO, Fred and Ginger. I've talked to death about them. They're behind me now. There's Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. And I was really like the menswear in those films. And I sort of registered why I liked that. But I never really thought to really want to do that myself or attempt that myself because I was too young, for one thing. And for another thing, my mind was on trying to learn. Again, 77, 78, I was just starting piano. And that was really, for me, piano was a real challenge. Even though I love music deeply, it does, things like musical instruments and writing and any endeavor a human does, any individual human will be better or worse at that. It'll take them longer. They'll get things quicker. And that's just the mystery. It's both a scientific and some would say, I guess, a spiritual matter. Just the mystery of individual personality that, some people are really quick. Some people learn to talk sooner than others and all those kinds of matters. But any event, learning the piano for me was very hard. It just was hard. It was slower to learn things, and I was, so I had to work much harder than many other people. And so that kind of took up a lot of time. But in any event, I went to Interlochen Arts Academy, and John Redman was the bassist in our two ensembles. We had a big band and we had a small group, and he was a he was a great musician who died tragically young, I think at age 19, somewhere in there, 20. Actually, the year after he went to University of Miami, I went to Boston, New England Conservatory of Music. We went into different parts of the U.S. and his freshman year, he passed, unfortunately. But he was on track, as I've said before, to become the next Will Lee, if you know who that was, the David Letterman bassist, or Heron Bullock, or Marcus Miller, comes to mind. These kind of what you call fusion, jazz rock fusion, or popular electric basses. So his thing was electric, not acoustic. Jaco Pastorius, of course, was always a big influence. These are the Gary Kane, I'm just naming names. He was into playing like that. And he was as good. He was going to be as good as those electric bassists. Okay? Here's the thing. He dressed more or less sort of like I do now. And he dressed like that every day. And we would go to rehearsal. I think it'd be like a Tuesday morning. Did we start at 9 a.m.? I think, breakfast, and then, 9 a.m., the big band, the studio orchestra, which I love. I love studio orchestra music. I love that kind of writing. I could go on. One of these days, I'm going to do an episode on big band arranging and things. I've talked a little bit about it. Anyhow, playing all that music, charts. And he would just show up. Now, of course, the style then, you have to think about the power of an era. I'm always talking about eras. 1984, 85. And what is it? It's Miami Vice, Don Johnson, Crockett and Tubbs, he had the skinny leather ties. And I began doing that too. We both were kind of into that. And he had these really thin Tom McCann shoes and dove gray, and baby blue shoes. And it's just not at all, has not been my style for 30 or 40 years since, because I'm into a more classic thing, and like this ties from the 70s, you can see. So it's not thin. This is as you see, it's patchwork, and each one of those pieces are left over from could have been their own silk tie. And that's something. Each of those alone, and this is like mid 70s, 75. So it's an unusual example of a 70s firm, albeit in traditional Boston, because this is from the Berkeley shop. That's Boston. Albeit Boston. Doing using, this is not polyester. These are all different silk foulard. So there were natural fibers in the 70s. So anyhow, I only mention that because it was very the opposite of what we were wearing. Me and John were wearing these little ties, and if you see Hollywood movies or studio movies about that era, and there are many, really starting, I think, in the 90s, like The Wedding Singer, of course, and I don't know why that came to mind, that movie, Hot Tub Time Machine, of course, Strange Days or Stranger Things, or all these productions. If you see a person, a man, or wearing a tie, it's going to be one of those, usually one of those real skinny. That's true. Yeah, the North Sea. North Sea's amazing. North Sea's amazing, Peter. North Sea is one of the great jazz festivals in the world. Yeah, and they archive their stuff really beautifully well. Anyway, so skinny lapels, this kind of thing, and then the big shoulder pads. And so This coat I'm wearing now is made to be sort of formal and sort of sporty because it's got those colors in it. It's not just a solid navy. But you could be fooled. If I sit here, you might think it's just a plain blue, plain, not plain, but you could think it could pass for a solid navy odd jacket or even a suit. So I want to show you something also interesting. Hold on. All right. All right, let's go. Okay. It's more or less the same blue. And it's more or less the same design, the lapels. It's what we call single breast. There's one breast. It doesn't fold over like a double-breasted, but it's got the double-breasted style lapel. It has the peak. But what do you notice? So if I turn here, notice this shoulder. It's what we call, I don't know, there's a lot of terms for it. It's sort of it's a real strong, prominent shoulder. It's not overdone, but it's a very English shoulder. In that there's interlinings put into it, and there's canvas, and it's to give a kind of it's to structure the coat. Completely opposite of what I was just wearing. If you look at this, if I hold up this jacket here, see how there's almost no shoulder? See? It's very little. And that the term, again, these terms were at the mercy of the language and all these terms. It phrases the natural shoulder. And that was the phrase that was used starting in the 50s, I guess. And the natural shoulder was, I guess, considered Ivy League or what they would call preppy or university style. Yeah, that's right. And it was Jack Kennedy and all that. And I kind of decided, well, of course I decided that when John, my friend and fellow musician, passed, I decided I would carry on dressing like that for the rest of my life, and I've been doing it ever since, more or less. I mean, in the same, with changes and things. So I'm going to put back, but I thought it's interesting how I was going by Jay Koss. Jay Koss called out to me, said, "Hey, Mitch, he has a place in New York City, Lower Manhattan." He says, "Mitch, how come you have two different tailors? Don't you want just one tailor? Why don't you just have the one tailor that has your look and your design?" And it was on purpose. I said, well, I actually wanted I wanted to try out and see what these two different people did. And one was almost no shoulder, no padding, and the other was traditional, in English, which is what. And I thought, just to have, everybody's different at that time. Look, I'm kind of you put your legs on. What is it? You put your pants on one leg at a time, and you kind of gotta try to. Let me go over here. So I was thinking. That all these things we're talking about now are they're kind of part of life. What I mean is that they're in the realms of utility and necessity. unless you want to walk around naked. And so they're also related to architecture, building. You have to house people, or people want to be housed in some form, or you go into a place. That's very connected to my concept of volume and mass. Just like you have a book that takes up volume. And I've said that the direction of history and society is towards the anti-physical, or, having everything in little chips and everything duplicated and not taking up any space. And that's been the, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So any of that, back to me dressing this way. So yeah, I started to dress this way, and then I would subscribe to, things like this. This is a Gentleman's Quarterly that I still have from the 80s. There's the King of Night is not Johnny Carson, but David Letterman. It says there is Donald Trump going broke. What if it were so? The most powerful man on Broadway. This is here is this. Yeah. June 1990. And so I kind of came across this interesting interview with Gay Talese, who's one of my models for dress. There's a few. He's one of them. And it's an interview, and they used to call him called Why I Wear What I Wear. And I was still subscribing to it in those years. And so let's see why Gay Talese wears kind of what, And the interviewer presses on him, Now Gay Talese, of course, is one of the founders of New Journalism with Joan Didion and Tom Wolfe. This triumvirate, really amazing writers of that. We're going to talk about Joan Didion and all these folks. Anyhow, Gay Talese, The Power and the Glory about the New York Times, and his book on the sexual revolution, Thy Neighbor's Wife, is still the best book, and there's been a lot written since about that revolution. I have a first edition over there. Any event, he was a dresser. He is, he's in his... And so it's interesting, they press on, why do you dress the way you do? Well, his uncle was a tailor. His uncle is Christiani in Paris. So part of it is his own, And this, of course, this interview is from 85, so it's a dated interview, But he says something interesting. They ask him, he says, "Is it true that you do not own a pair of blue jeans?" And you can see here, he says, "It's hard to answer that question without sounding elitist in some way. Blue jeans are recognized in terms of function and durability unquestionably. They have certainly been a marketing success around the world. Blue jeans are one of the few items you find in all cultures." That's right, the universal language. And that's one of the reasons I don't want any part of them. They're like a uniform. But he goes on to say something very interesting. This is the interview that really influenced me, because this is 1986. I read this interview. I saw this picture. There's a younger, much younger Gay Talese there. He's smoking. This is 86, on his Ocean City, New Jersey. But now this is a style of interviewing that I sort of actually respect and like. It's not my style. It's quite different, but it's its own style. We're back to style again. And, I have a John Denver interview in Playboy that I'm going to bring out one of these days from 1977. And John Denver makes the woman who's doing the story on him, makes her go camping with him. He says, "I'll be in your magazine, in your Playboy magazine, only if you go camping with me and enjoy the wonders of nature." That's this poor, or maybe happy, she has to go camping with John Denver to do the interview. Anyway, this is sort of along those same lines. So, where are we here? They said, "But what if you wanted to go camping?" This is funny. "I don't go camping. I've never been camping in my life. I've never been fishing in my life. I mean, there are just things that are common experiences for everyone else that I have never done. I've never gone hunting." And then the interviewer goes, "Well, what about touch football? Sports?" Saturday, Gay Talese says, "Sportswear, well, if I'm going to the gym, I'll wear I got my thing to wear there in the locker. The Alexander Shields, whatever it is. Yeah, Alexander Shields warm up in a tennis outfit. So that's funny. So I thought, well, if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. Now, not by choice, but I happen to be living in a town now where it seems like the entire world goes camping and fishing. And so, it's all good. I'm just saying there's different ways to live. Thought that was interesting. What am I doing here? This is what I'm doing. Remember these? And I held up these very different Toscanini 9 Beethoven Symphonies and Lenny White Venusian Summer. I thought it'd be interesting, or just maybe even entertaining, I don't know, to play a little bit of both. So, and I'm going to do something a little different. So I found the 1948 Toscanini NBC film of the Ninth. I'm not going to play the Ninth. I'm just going to play a few minutes, but just to see Arturo Toscanini. And then I'm going to surprise with Lenny White. Now, Lenny White is major drummer in the jazz world. Played with Chick Corea and Return to Forever, but he also is a really great straight-ahead player. Plays bebop really well. Came up doing that, I think, with Horace Silver and other people before he played jazz rock. But this is kind of this Venusian Summer from 1975 is not really my kind of music per se. I mean, I like the album, but it's a little different. It's a little more like prog rock than jazz rock and pushes in that direction. There's a lot of heavy electric guitar, and Al Di Meola and Larry Coryell both play on the album. Really phenomenal musicians, phenomenal musicianship. But I thought it'd be interesting just to put these together and think about, well, what does it mean that you have a world that in 1948, you're of course, that's quite significant, what we have come out of, and it's not accidental, of course, that Leonard Bernstein does the Ninth again in 1989 in Berlin. I think at 90, the Berlin concert, unification concert, and he does the Beethoven's Ninth, so maybe he had it in mind. His predecessor, Arturo Toscanini, but I've got the TV, and I'm going to look at some of these things. So bear with me. It's kind of fun to... Now, the only reason I picked these albums is because of their cover. It's not necessarily to talk about Beethoven or Lenny White. It's because I was trying to find the most opposite... I mean, these are kind of the most opposite presentations of a commercially released object you could think of in two very different eras. I thought it's so interesting that we have, I just find things like that fascinating. Just something. So I have to bear with me here. This is the part of the video where do people fast forward as if they're watching it? I don't know. I'm not really. All right, let's go. Let's do it. This is not This is not the part of the symphony I wanted, but it'll do. It's where it's queued up. All right. Picture's not perfect, but it's not. Yeah, just get a little. Transition music, right? It's not that long. That's Toscanini.
Oh, Freunde,
Well, you know that piece, hopefully. I just wanted to, this is the NBC radio, the NBC, 1948. So, what we had been through. I mean, this is, well, in a similar way, Leonard Bernstein, what is it? Was it 1991? When did he do the 90? Somewhere in there. The reunification in Germany. So we're going to have to shift gears. The Copyright Act of 1976. So we're going close to 1976 now, what I'm going to play, but fair use, criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education. Which this certainly is. This is all those things. Not so much criticism. I guess it's a little criticism maybe, but mostly it's a lot of, and it's news reporting, 1948 defeating Hitler and all that, news reporting, Toscanini. So I'm going to do something a little, I keep saying this, unusual. Well, I'm going to play a reaction video, a random sort of one of the many reaction videos to Lenny White's Venusian Summer by these two, I guess a man and a woman. I know nothing about them. I know nothing about their channel. I really know nothing really about them as musicians. I mean, I'm looking in their home, and there's a lot of Pink Floyd and Jimi Hendrix posters, so I'm guessing they're really into rock, and that's probably one of the reasons they like this album. But I just love watching their reaction. I thought it'd be fun rather than just playing the Lenny White, just to see if I've got it queued up here. Yeah, here we go. Our first reaction to Lenny White, Prince of the Sea. And this is Nick and Lex. And this is Al Di Meola. Al Di Meola, again, like any great soloist, has totally their own style. I talk about Miles Davis's tone. Al Di Meola does this thing, his articulation, and Larry Cordell too. Sorry. what do we? How is this the same and different than the Beethoven? Well, well, I mean that they'll talk. These two actually say some interesting things. I don't. They're just responding to. Well, in some ways, the Beethoven is. Well, the excerpt of the Ninth Symphony we heard is a presentation of a very clear, very well written melody. We call it the Ode to Joy, right? And it's part of the theme of it's the theme of that movement, the symphony, last movement. And so it's announcing, you have singers and it's so in a sense there's a kind of, it's very, well, so the term I would use is it's triadic, right? It's triadic. So it's it's that, which is like, and it's the sound and expression of the 18th and some of the 19th centuries, even some of the 17th, and it's but it's very clear, and it moves. There's a lot of movement in the Beethoven. In the Lenny White, it's actually slower in harmonic rhythm, and it's also triadic, but it's a different relationship to tonality. So
the guitar playing. It's not El Viola, but holy crap, he does sound like him a lot. And
here.
Where is it?
Is it Larry Coryell? I think it's Larry Coryell.
Oh my God, yes, but it's also Larry Coryell.
Right, Larry Coryell.
So
I had the opportunity to play with the late Larry Coryell. Because, see, Larry Coryell, my teacher Stanley Cowell for a period of time was Larry Coryell's pianist when Larry Coryell was playing straight ahead. Because Larry Coryell, a lot in the 90s, 2000s, was going back to playing acoustic music, doing acoustic solo guitar and all that. Really great. And playing sort of jazz with Stanley Cowell. And I think they, really had a real affinity with each other, guitar and piano. And Buster Williams, So this is kind of interesting. So I'm gonna turn this off because I don't want to. So what I was saying about harmonic rhythm. So if we have versus let's see here. What if I did this? Or so, 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 or That's it. That's actually like the second. It's both slower and faster. It's because you're it's like a drone. It's an ostinato. You're alternating between very simple material, but the harmonic density is more complex than the Beethoven in the moment. But the Beethoven has more development over time. So it's kind of, I'm grasping, this is very, you don't have to prepare kind of a thing, right? It's both good. I mean, I don't want to, and again, have no interest whatsoever in comparing them evaluatively, because I'm not interested in this is not to talk about how great Beethoven is and how this is this rock music and that would be, first of all, that I never want to live in a world. Thankfully, the world has many things wrong with it, but thankfully, it's a world in which, hopefully, there's a place for both the Lenny White and the Beethoven. By which I mean these different kinds of instrumental music, and different approaches to music, and they're expressing different kinds of human emotion. As you can see, these two people getting into the music. I was getting into music, but there's a kind of that kind of all the joy. It's different. It's different expressions of emotion. I'm almost have to say that all art and all these things exist so that only the thing being expressed, it's for the sake of the indivisible, inviolable expression of that thing. So if you want that, I guess it's the ecstasy of that kind of triumph of the Beethoven in the major mode, this theme. If Beethoven wants to express those things, and again, this is tricky because I don't agree with Jim Stevenson. Love Jim Stevenson as a composer, but I think music is much less narratively oriented than he hears music. But what I'm saying, it's much more abstract. But what I'm saying is that it does express emotions and affect, and that the only way Beethoven can do that is to use those elements. He's sort of required in a way. He's a free he was a free composer, but if he wants to express certain things, there's certain tools he needs. In the same way, this group of Lenny White and this jazz rock group from 1975 has to empty out and restrict their harmonic palette so that the guitarist can do something expansive with a minimal, if you call it minimal, background. And all of that is by design. Toscanini has to show up and do rehearsals with these singers, and these are all design-made things in the world. Humans make these things so that not only can certain things be expressed, but also certain other things will not be expressed, if I could put it that way. Kind of, like the feeling of comedy versus tragedy kind of thing, as obvious as that is, but that's kind of what we're talking about a little bit. And so it's one of the purposes of this podcast is to remind ourselves, or both that the world needs all of these styles, but also sometimes to try to get inside of these styles and figure out what makes them tick, what makes the style have the effect upon us that it does, how it achieves its aims, and some of that has to do with, in the case of this stuff we were looking, it has to do with things like tonality and modes and harmony and notes against notes. And also, in this part of the symphony, the singers outright express this song. It's a very clear melody. And so for Beethoven in that moment in the symphony, the clarity of the melody is everything. Later on, he will develop it and have background figures, and he will do counterpoint and transfigure and transform that melody. But here he wants to just state it. He wants to, almost a little bit like what we jazz people do. You state the theme and then you develop it. And so that's the part of the symphony where the singers are saying, presenting this Schiller, I think it's a Schiller poem, I think. I'm not quite an encyclopedia. I'm half of an encyclopedia. So I promised I would go back to Sontag, and we will, because it relates very much. So that's what I'm going to do now. Do you mind if I get rid of this? Should I play like little music? And I don't know. I'll talk while I do this. So, the thing about artistic styles is that they exist in the world to they exist in the world to express never all of life, but partial. They're partial. And that's the genius of the arts, is that they put a spotlight on something, and they're partial. So we're going to be doing a kind of a lengthy series like we did with the Hannah Arendt, but for John Updike. And John Updike is dealing with, I mean, it's something a lot of people get sick of hearing about, but I thought that was all the more reason to do it. Sort of, middle class, white, suburban Pennsylvania. We're going to be dealing with him as a writer, great writer. But he, John Updike is purposefully partial. There's things, although in some of the books like Rabbit Redux and he deals with other aspects of society and the revolutions of the 60s and 70s, and certainly the sexual revolution. Rabbit is Rich. We'll get into all that. But I'm really looking forward to that series. But the only reason I bring that up is in focusing on that, John Updike has to turn away from, not focus on look at other things, many other things actually. He has to leave stuff out. Kind of like if you make something, there's boundaries about what you make. Like this cup isn't the size of this room, right? Obviously, it stops somewhere and it finishes, right? And this Farrah Fawcett is like a repeating. That effect is only made possible by the fact that it's one image, and the image is the size that it is, so that you could repeat it. And that swimsuit is a one-piece swimsuit, and that smile and her hair, she's expressing. So in this pose, she's expressing aspects of not just human sexuality or desire, but kind of maybe a notion of happiness or something. And it is very. Some would say it's very simple. You could say it's very simple, but it kind of has to be this way to communicate this. It's sort of like now there are many people that might hate this and not want to see it communicated at all. They want some other things communicated, quite, who knows, quite contrary, the feeling. And so growing up as I did in New York of the 70s and the 80s, I was trying to make sense of, sometimes they call it the cacophony of voices. Making sense of seeing not Cindy Sherman, I'm sorry. well, what was it? What was it? Well, the Al Pacino in the David Ray play Pavlo Hummel, sort of the violence and the rawness of that Vietnam play, and sitting so close to Pacino, and the grunts and the Vietnamese sex workers in that play, and just it's really, and as a child watching this, just blew me away. But what I'm saying is that the cacophony of going from that to bedroom farce, English by Alan Ayckbourn, or I don't know, something more anodyne. I mean, what I mean is, or a different performance artist like Spalding Gray, Karen Finley. That's who I was thinking of. But Karen Finley's more '90s. I mean, it's later, but what I'm saying is, I had an instinctive and intuitive feeling that all this stuff had to be the way that it was. But I also realized that the world, or the authority figures, or what you want to call them, would rather it be the case that only one style would be expressed, if we could put it that way. Or wanted to narrow the range in all sorts of directions. Maybe you wanted nothing narrative. I mean, I have friends in the avant-garde world. They don't like narrative cinema. I mean, they don't. It's not that they don't understand it. It's not that but they're opposed. They don't do that. But that's a kind. They've decided that that's a kind of narrowing. Although, in their consciousness, they're expanding. They're rebelling against this thing that was set down. And then there are other filmmakers that can only think in terms of story. They can't free themselves from a certain conception of story, an event, and that could be its own, could be a trap or narrowing, And the second musical selection I played was I'm interested in those kind of harmonies, and I try to use those in my own writing. But a lot of people might think that's boring. And still other people might think that the guitar solo is too dense in information. It's like they get caught by the intricacy of information, even though harmonically it's rather regular. And it's kind of smooth harmonically. It's not that dense, but what the guitar soloist is doing, it is quite dense in terms of notes, in terms of, you want to say, sonic events. And the lines are quite intricate. And just that alone would put off many people who have a inability to process that kind of musical information. Of course, that's part of what I do. So clearly I have the ability to play and perform those kind of musical expression that's dense like that. But of course, sometimes I want to settle down. In the last concert I did, I was using a lot of chords, and I was interested in settling down and playing a little bit less, maybe, and more rhythmically. There's a lot of possibilities that you do. But these things all have to do with, living in a world in which it's possible to make these kinds of choices, like the Wendy Steiner, The Beauty of Choice. It's your book over there. So I'm going to go back to Sontag because it might seem far afield, but it isn't. Because all the way back in 65, 66, she's talking about the same stuff we're talking about today in this episode, the same questions, same problems. And she's a real smart thinker. So, she does the thing in rhetoric where she states these assertions, but then she does the but. Suppose all this is admitted. She does her own what about this, which is a wonderful device. I use it in my writing. I try to. I've forgotten the technical term. These all have technical terms in grammar and syntax. So I got to get out my glasses. So when we last left off the on style, she says there's no such thing As she says, there are no stylist works of art. Only works of art belonging to different, more or less complex stylistic traditions and conventions, which means that the Beethoven belonged to the 18th century conventions. Yes, Beethoven was using conventions. That makes Beethoven possible. That he had imbued and mastered and internalized those conventions of triads and Larry Coryell has conventions about a rock solo and playing guitar in a certain way. Distortion, your conventions, all sorts of conventions. And so and she goes, a more or less complex stylistic traditions and conventions. Then she goes on to say something interesting. She historicizes her claim. She doesn't use that word, but she says, this means that the notion of style, generically considered, has a specific historical meaning. It is not only that styles belong to a time and a place. Again, Hot Tub Time Machine, The Wedding Singer, Adam Sandler, that's a time and place of a certain kind of Romeo and Michelle's High School Reunion, a certain kind of Hollywood comedy, right? That's a time. It's also a time and place, right? Time and place. It's not only that styles belong to a time and a place, and that our perception of the style of a given work of art is always changed with an awareness of the work's historicity. She does use the word, I've forgotten. There it is, its place in a chronology. Further, the visibility of styles is itself a product of historical consciousness. Were it not for departures from or experimentation with previous artistic norms which are known to us, we could never recognize the profile of a new style. So she's saying, of course, that the very newness of a thing, the innovation of a thing, is dependent on there being some kind of tradition to begin with, right? Or some kind of, so when I learned piano, that's what I was doing. God, when I think about it now, it seems immense to me, all the work that I did, because I was really, and I didn't, at the time I was doing it, trying to do it, working at it. But what I only realized now in hindsight, many years later, is that I was actually trying to do two things. I was trying to learn the conventions of a tradition, or several traditions of musical languages, and also create something new with all of that. So it's like you're learning. It's like, I guess, like learning to walk, maybe, or crawling. Maybe it is related, or speech. I don't know. And so you're, but and also it's a matter of degree. Like sometimes a person will focus on the convention, meaning I really want to sound like such and such or this, and that you gotta get that into your, especially as you get into your nervous system. So I watched one of my favorite Ozu films, The End of Summer, last week, because summer's ending, and the death. Do you know the Ozu, the end where there's the death of the businessman, and everybody looks at the smoke and the coming out of the cemetery, and just beautiful. So I've seen so many Yashizuri Ozu movies that I feel like he's part of my nervous system. And I've never been to Japan, but I know those films. I know Suzuka Hara and Shishu and all the characters, and Late Spring and Early Autumn and End of Summer, Autumn Afternoon. Those are different films. And so I actually have to say that if I don't watch an Ozu film at least twice a year, I won't be right in the head. So that means that Ozu is kind of like Shakespeare in a way. It's pretty canonical for me, pretty foundational. Almost like the way certain bebop pianists are, the way Cedar Walton is, for example, or I don't know, some of the people I've talked about, Hampton Hawes or Bill Evans. It's kind of, and so something's not right in the world. And when I watch an Ozu film, everything's immediately right in the world, because of the relationship I'm having with what he does with character of these people in Japan. So when we return to this book, I guess, interpretation of this essay on style, we're making things right in a way in the world. So there's this sense in which we go, okay. And even if we don't agree with it, there's still some progress being made, if we could put it that way. And what is the word she uses here? This is interesting. The notion of having a style is one of the solutions that has arisen intermittently since the Renaissance to the crises that have threatened old ideas of truth, of moral rectitude, and also of naturalness. Now, she has that foremost in her mind because she's watching Barbara Rubin's Christmas on Earth and Jack Smith's Flaming Creatures and hanging out with the Warhol crowd and Viva. And some of those films deal in difficult, unpleasant subject matter and sort of, or sort of maybe sometimes shaking a fist at truth and moral rectitude and naturalness, certainly, because they're very, that artwork is I want to say flagrantly artificial. It's triumphantly artificial, which after all is what art is anyhow, so it's fine. But what I mean is where's this artifice on its sleeve, you know? But I remember I would talk about the but. But suppose all this is omitted. She says, suppose all this is omitted, that all representation is incarnated in a given style, easy to say, in parentheses, she says, easy to say, that there is therefore, strictly speaking, no such thing as realism, except as itself a special stylistic convention, a little harder. And interesting, she says a little easy to say, little harder to say right there. That still there are styles and styles. And she goes on, but I don't want to skip all that. I mean, I don't really want to skip it. We'd be here all night. I don't want to, but darn. I am not saying that a work of art creates a world which is entirely self-referring. So she wants to make, she's not saying that, at least you think I'm saying that. It's not self-contained and self-referential, no. It's not quite what I'm saying, although it may sound like it. Of course, works of art, with the important exception of music, see, she's what I was just saying, refer to the real world. Again, I think music's not about the real world. As I said, music's about the real world in the sense that it's our emotions and affect, which are very real, very human, but it isn't, you know, like that Lenny White album is not telling us about a train going through a tunnel, and that guitar solo is not a traveler on a road going from town to town. I mean, you could think that, and you could put that music to that image if you want to, but it's not objectively that. It could be many things. It's not, so that's not really the real world. With the important exception of music, refer to the real world, to our knowledge, to our experience, to our values. They present information and evaluations. But their distinctive feature is that they give rise not to conceptual knowledge, which is the distinctive feature of discursive or scientific knowledge, philosophy, sociology, psychology, history, those disciplines that are now very popular, I might add, because we live in a conceptual age, so that's true. More so than when she was writing, it's gone further. But to something like an excitation, so a phenomenon of commitment, judgment, and a state of thraldom or captivation. Now, she's into this, okay. Check her out in 66, baby. There you go. So she's saying, I'm going to riff on what she's saying. She's saying history, sociology, like, it's sort of like right now I'm studying the 80s and the 90s, so I'm watching Melrose Place, the OC, Beverly Hills 90210. Yes, I'm watching those things. Don't ask. It's a well, some of it's quite good actually, but one of the reasons is I'm trying to learn about the 80s and the 90s, studying it. Other people now are very interested in the Menendez trial, also a 90s phenomenon. But these are kind of, artifacts and documents of an era. So there's a place for knowledge in learning about the world, if you're curious enough. But she's saying that there's this other thing that does go beyond that, and check out her language. This is her language. Language. Excitation, a phenomenon of commitment, judgment in a state of thraldom or captivation. Interesting language. Which is to say that the knowledge we gain through art is an experience of the form or style of knowing something, rather than a knowledge of something like a fact or a moral judgment in itself. And this is very important, and this is where I do agree with her. We often confuse the two, because humans, just like humans do things with words, to quote J. Austin, How to Do Things with Words, famous analytic philosophy essay we do things with life, and we make things like sculptures and music and record albums. And this book, they made this book, and she wrote this book, and right? And in doing that, you're in the realm of the experience of a form or a style of knowing something. She goes on, this explains the preeminence of the value of expressiveness in works of art, and how the value of expressiveness, that is, of style, rightly takes precedence over content. She makes a remark on Paradise Lost. Now, I've read all this stuff. I've read Paradise Lost, Milton. But she says something interesting. Now, this raises so many questions, and we don't have well enough in time to go through them all. But she's being a little forceful here. She says, the satisfactions of Paradise Lost for us do not lie in its views on God and man, but in the superior kinds of energy, vitality, expressiveness, which are incarnated in the poem. Those are all part of aesthetics. Hence, too, the peculiar dependence of a work of art, however expressive, upon the cooperation of the person having the experience. So we have to meet it halfway. We got to be down for the experience. If we're watching an Ozu film, we got to be down for having those people look at the camera and look at us when they talk to the other person. No one else does that in film. Utterly, like I'm talking to you now, there's another character. Ozu's camera puts you in the position of the other party. It's, in dealing with people sitting on the ground, not sitting in chairs, but sitting on the ground. And strange jokes, you got to give yourself over to that. For one may see what is said. Okay, so she goes on. Sorry to interrupt her prose. For one may see what is said, quote unquote, but remain unmoved, either through dullness or distraction. Art is seduction, not rape. A work of art proposes a type of experience designed to manifest the quality of imperiousness. But art cannot seduce without the complicity of the experiencing subject. I'm trying to find the moment where Here we go. This is the word nourishment. She uses the word nourishment, believe it or not. She says, I have several times applied to the work of art the metaphor of a mode of nourishment. To become involved with the work of art entails, to be sure, the experience of detaching oneself from the world. You've got to detach yourself from the world. I mean, but the work of art itself is also a vibrant, magical, and exemplary object, which returns us to the world in some way more open and enriched than, I should add, she doesn't add, we began than formerly. And that's how she's describing nourishment. A work of art is a kind of showing or recording or witnessing. It's a witness, that's right. Which gives palpable form to consciousness. You have to get palpable form to consciousness. Make consciousness real. It's not... People love the debate now, is consciousness real? And there are many people that don't think consciousness exists. It's a common view now. Alas and alack, that's where we are. But one thing an artist could do is make it palpable so that there's not really a question about it, right? So that's kind of palpable. Its object is to make something singular explicit. So far as it is true that we cannot judge, morally, conceptually, unless we generalize, then it is also true that the experience of works of art and what is represented in works of art transcends judgment, though the work itself may be judged as art. It's tricky. Isn't this just what we recognize as a feature of the Iliad and the novels of Tolstoy and the plays of Shakespeare? That such art overrides our petty judgments, our facile labeling of persons and acts as good or bad, and that this can happen is all to the good. There is even a gain in the cause of morality in it. She's swaining now. She goes on to make this distinction that morality is utilitarian, and she says it here, for morality, unlike art, is ultimately justified by its utility. That it makes or is supposed to make life more humane and livable for us all. Though we live in a world, I don't like to bring current events, in which I think read the other day that there's more slavery today than in the 1850s around the world. So that's there's many problems, but what I'm saying is, that's more humane and more livable, right? So, but consciousness, what used to be called rather tendentiously, as I was just being tendentious, I apologize. The faculty of contemplation can be and is wider and more various than action. It has its nourishment, she uses the word twice, nourishment, art and speculative thought, activities, which can be described either as self-justifying or in no need of justification. Now she's philosophic. In this text, she says the world just presents itself. It just is. And she says the world has no need to justify itself. It's a little bit like Bernard Williams' phrase, one of my favorite phrases of his, one thought too many. If you're thinking that the world has to justify itself, or you ask too often or too much why we're here and all that, it's kind of like one thought too many. It's sort of like the implication is that it's its own gift, its own intrinsic value, its own intrinsic beauty kind of thing, right? And then she says that All works of art are founded on a certain distance from the lived reality which is represented. So those examples of Hollywood movies, Romy Michelle, Mira Sorvino, and Lisa Kudrow they look like their characters as women, young women, and they're dressed like their characters, but they're not literally those people. I mean, they are, it's a film. So that in itself is one kind of distance. Is it Alan Cummings when they had that dance to the Cyndi Lauper? Time After Time, I think. They do that expressive dance, the three of them. It's sort of comic, but sort of kind of sweet, I mean, they're really dancing. They have to have the chops to dance, but they're not at a reunion. I mean, it's just not a real. They don't. As far as last time I checked, Lisa Kudrow and Mira Sorvino are not from Tucson, Arizona, and did not go to Sagebrush High School. This is the acting part, right? The make believe part. That's a kind of a distance. The same way that if you write a sentence, it creates this sort of distance, right? Kind of distance. This distance, quote unquote, is by definition inhuman or impersonal to a certain degree. For in order to appear to us as art, the work must restrict sentimental intervention and emotional participation, which are functions of closeness, which counterposes that to distance, right? Well, yes and no. I want to say yes and no. Yes and no. I like reading that. A work of art is first of all an object, so not an imitation. So it's an object and not an imitation, meaning that there's distance, but it's not imitative distance. It's not, right? Not an imitation. And it is true that all great art is founded on distance, on artificiality, on style, on what Ortega y Gasset calls dehumanization, which in his language is not pejorative, but is positive. Again, we don't have to follow along, but it's interesting to but then she goes on to say, she catches herself, she says, but the notion of distance is misleading unless one adds that the movement is not just away from, but toward the world. It's a way of encountering the world, she says. Encountering the world. An artist's style is, from a technical point of view, nothing other than the particular idiom in which he deploys the forms is italicized, forms of his art. It is for this reason that the problems raised by the concept of style, quotes, overlap with those raised by the concept of form, quotes, and the solutions will have much in common. And she goes on to talk about Coleridge, Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, And she says that rhythmical, sometimes rhyming, character of all primitive oral literatures, rhythm and rhyme and the more complex formal resources of poetry, such as meter, symmetry of figures, antitheses, are the means that words afford for creating a memory of themselves before material signs, writing. She's read too much Barthes. This isn't really a criticism, but, she loved Roland Barthes, and I'm thinking about writing Degree Zero. I don't know if anybody knows that text. I'm getting two, but there's a little bit of that, and it's okay. Hence, everything that an archaic culture wishes to commit to memory is put in poetic form. Today's styles do not develop slowly and succeed each other gradually over long periods of time, which allow the audience for art to assimilate fully the principles of repetition on which the work of art is built, but instead succeed one another so rapidly. She's writing in the 60s, remember, so rapidly, as to seem to give their audiences no breathing space to prepare. And we are not in a time like that today with regard to art, but we are in a time like that with regard to how we live. Infrastructure, technology, that changes very rapidly. Using this way to communicate and in that way, and this platform, and the ceaseless changing of platforms, that's very rapid. It has the rapidity that artistic styles used to have. Right now, artistic styles are a little bit, I won't say they're stagnant, but it's kind of, there's a house style that everything's in. It's going to be episodic. It's going to be based on 19th century narrative, and a lot of characters that involve a family maybe or a crime. Those are kind of, things that almost, I won't say they're required, but they're preferred today. And that strikes me as kind of more static than not. But she goes on to say, for if one does not perceive how a work repeats itself, the work is almost literally not perceptible, and therefore at the same time not intelligible. It is the perception of repetitions that makes a work of art intelligible. So the phenomenon, I'm going to sit in my chair, I've seen this before. There's a man on a horse, it's a Western. Familiarity, repetition, a stranger comes to town. There's a trouble in the town. The stranger is going to save the town, help the town. Or is the stranger coming to town evil? He's going to come in and upset the town and harm the town in some way. Those are forms, we could, the forms of music and stuff. And I'm sort of having fun. It's almost 6:30. Should I stop? Should I go? Have I spoken too much? Too much Susan Sontag? Never enough Susan Sontag. This is the beginning of the week. I usually do this on a Friday, but I'm going to say, everybody, thank you for coming out. And I think it's next week. Christoph Schlerin, a great conductor from Europe. Show with him, October 19th, I think. And other surprises coming up. Books. Annie Dillard coming up. I'll be talking about prose again, just like I did today. And I hope you have a decent and good week. And I'm going to try to make more pop-ups here and there about things, maybe about television or something, or these TV shows I'm watching. I do want to talk a lot about them because they're interesting, and they're very much not like the Ozu. I mean, they got people in them, but that's the only commonality. But the commonality ends there. But I look forward to that. Thank you, and I look forward to Christoph Schlerin and classical music and conducting, the art of conducting, and other shows to come. Thank you.